different font.
Yeah, I know it. That, yeah, it's absolutely nuts. What? There's fine.
I didn't know if you were anything in either, I was waiting for him in the parking lot.
My, yeah, my back is killing me. That standing now is like, ugh. All right, since we're such a small group, let's, Kelsey, shut those lights off. We'll have kind of a discussion service today. We'll go for the. All right, so, announcements, tomorrow's Chaplain Chat, next week we'll have worship 7:30 here. And, I'm working on, how does everybody's Thursday night look? Open? Ryan, you work.
I work, but I can change.
Okay, well, I was thinking about having a discussion group on Thursday night where we'll discuss different issues. And at worship, I'll give you the issue we're gonna discuss. And then Thursday night at Weeks House we'll meet and we'll have dessert or something to discuss the topic. That sound okay for you guys?
Yep.
And just a kind of, let's work on this, the whole vision and understanding of us getting together and living into our faith, right? So it's kind of an extension of this, but it also opens up a little bit more where voices are heard. Okay, so then, all right, today we're gonna talk about the fundamentals of faith too, and the basics, and how important it is to learn the basics as we grow. And I love this. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it's our last worship on Black History Month. So there's two things you're going to see today. You're going to get introduced to Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King's spiritual guide during the Civil Rights Movement. Also, this is, you guys have all been around me enough. You've heard me say this quote multiple times, I'm sure. Faith is taking that first step, even when you don't see this whole staircase. So as we go into worship tonight, and as we work into this, think about that for a minute and allow that to penetrate as we go through. All right, Ryan, you want to do it from right there if you want. I'm sitting, by the way, because of my back.
Please join me in the call to worship. Let us worship God, who has done great things.
We rejoice in our God, who made a way through the desert of this world.
Let us worship God, who has caused streams of mercy to flow in the wasteland.
We are the people God has formed through Christ. We worship and rejoice.
Let us worship God in spirit and truth.
Praise God for the grace that has saved us. Hallelujah, and we rejoice. Okay, guys, let's tackle these together since we're a small group tonight. Tell me, what are some basic concepts of faith? What are some things that you think about that tie into your faith life? Right.
One of the very basic fundamental concepts for me with faith on a daily basis is that idea of serving with others, and serving others for that matter too, because it goes two different ways. It's one thing that you serve others for the better good of a community, of your people, of a group, but it's another thing to serve with others for that equal goal as well, that answer that we are looking for.
So service is a huge piece of the puzzle of your faith life. That's a great answer. What else, guys?
I think a faith is like a trust. Like if you, like somebody says like, oh, you have faith in yourself, like do you trust in your ability, you have trust in another person or another power. That's kind of what I think about faith.
Good one. Trust, you gotta have trust, right? You gotta be able to trust God even when things are up and down, right? Kind of thing. What else? Anything else hit you guys? What about prayer? Is that part of your faith life? It's kind of like you know, one of those things that if you're an athlete, do you just show up to the court or the football field or the track and everything goes great? Or do you practice and practice and practice? That's what our faith life is too. We have to practice. So how do we live out our faith in our daily life? How do we live into that ethic of faith? And you two answered that as really well. Trust and service is a huge piece of the puzzle. Commitment comes to mind when I think of it. Dedication comes to mind when I think of it. These are all things. So what do you think for you guys' age group, 18 to 22 or 23? What is it that moves you in your faith life? Gets it right? Or is that?
Well, I was just seeing if
Oh.
somebody else wanted to, but I'm not gonna go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, bud.
It really just comes down to the people in my life, and those are people even as simply as just a simple hello, or a simple greeting, or a very thoughtful thank you as well for something even small. I feel like it's just that give in return that people give to one another every day, and that is what I cherish for in faith as well.
I like that because when you have faith, it's not only faith in God, right? It's faith in your community, it's faith in connections, it's faith in understanding other people. So those are really important questions. And as we go forth in our daily lives and in our existence, we have to ask these questions if we want to grow in our faith lives. And it's important to connect like that. All right. All right, then you want to lead us in prayer? Sure.
Gracious God, empower us this day to live into the truth of your divine grace and love. Teach us to embrace the radical ethic of agape love. Inspire us to be willing to forgive abundantly and to seek to heal and reconcile with others. Guide us to the path that sees all your creation as blessing and brings hope into a world filled with hopelessness. As we walk through this season of Lent, help us to reflect upon the things that we are called to do better. Let us be humble enough to grow in our faith lives. Open our eyes to see where we are called to help and grant us the courage to act in ways that will bring assistance to others. We lift up all who are struggling at this time and ask that you would provide comfort and peace to them in whatever they are struggling with. Be with all living in violence. Allow them to find peace in their lives and bring forth an end to the violence. Grant wisdom to those in power to find ways to bring forth an end to the violence. All of this we ask in those words that you have taught us to pray. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. All right, you guys have heard me talk about Howard Thurman a lot. This is a short introduction of who he was. And he is one of the most profound thinkers of the last century. He, as I said before, his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, was actually held on to. King is said to have had that with him always. Howard Thurman was one of the first to truly work at understanding how God lives into those who struggle, those who are oppressed, those who are kept down. So when we talk about faith and we talk about living into service, Howard Thurman centers that service on the least and how we're called to that. So it's about an 8-minute video, guys, but it's really a good video. So.
He was born the grandson of slaves, yet Howard Thurman would become one of the most celebrated religious figures of the 20th century. A spiritual mentor to Martin Luther King Jr.
Whether we want it that way or not, we all tied together.
And a moral anchor for the civil rights movement.
Martin Luther King Jr. would quote Howard Thurman on many, many occasions.
I think Howard Thurman, for many leaders in that movement, King included, played the role of pastor.
In the 1930s, after a historic meeting with Mahatma Gandhi, Thurman becomes one of the early voices for nonviolent resistance, for a people who over centuries experienced unimaginable violence.
He helped to establish the philosophical framework of how to struggle.
He saw himself as a spiritual activist because he was fundamentally a teacher.
He had this combination of being kind and being strong, and I think that's a very rare combination.
While Sunday morning was often considered the most segregated hour in the week, Thurman helped pioneer a church where people of different races and religions could worship together.
He's suspicious of denomination and dogma and creed. He would never identify himself as a theologian because he thought theologians boxed God.
And he was called a mystic because he believed religious experience was best explored within.
Howard Thurman was actually practicing contemplative spirituality before we actually started calling it contemplative spirituality.
At his heart, he was a nature mystic. Thurman is talking to trees. Trees.
Yet this mystic was also an outspoken critic of Christianity for its part in the nation's deep racial divides, and he countered with a shocking new work that offered a revolutionary new way of understanding the life of Jesus Christ and how it speaks directly to the oppressed and disinherited.
I carry the book with me, Jesus in this narrative, every day.
And he gives an Africanity to the interpretation of Jesus.
He provided a spiritual perspective that was empowering.
There were people encountering Thurman's work and being shaken at their core.
I would have to find out what was the word that the religion of Jesus had to say to the man with his back against the wall.
Major funding for this program was provided by Lilly Endowment.
You will find true success and happiness if you have only one goal. There really is only one, and that is this: to fulfill the highest, most truthful expression of yourself. Theologian Howard Thurman said it best. He said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive."
The 1960s and the civil rights movement is exploding across America. A century after a civil war was fought to end slavery, deeply rooted segregation and blatant racism are still legal in many parts of the nation. Now they're being met head on.
I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be uneducated, but I am somebody.
Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, Otis Moss Jr., Vernon Jordan, and other civil rights leaders are convinced the moment for resistance has come. And no matter how they are treated, they are committed to nonviolence.
The spirit in man is not easily vanquished. It is fragile and tough. You may fail again and again, and yet something will not let you give up. Something keeps you from accepting no as a final answer. It is this quality that makes for survival of values when the circumstances of one's life are most against decency, goodness, and right.
They were given the power and the authority to respond to the realities of injustice in ways that could be true to their faith and in ways that did not require them to compromise the integrity of who they were.
Many feel it is Howard Thurman, through his insights and early commitment to nonviolence, who evokes a spirit felt across the entire movement.
want it that way or not, we all tied together. Every Negro in America is a little white, and every white man in America is a little Negro. The Negro needs the white man to save him from his fears, and the white man needs the Negro to save him from his fears. We need each other.
People sometimes seem to think that nonviolence was very endemic to the African American community as a way of life, when in fact it was not. And even Thurman is very clear that nonviolence was a kind of a cultivated experience for most rank and file people, including leadership.
I would agree that Howard Thurman was a saint of the movement.
He gave us the basis for the march, that we know why we march, the principles upon which we march, how we march, and what we do after the march.
He helped to establish the philosophical framework of how to struggle. You cannot let the oppressor break your spirit, then make him break your bones or your arms, but not your spirit. That's the stuff of Howard Thurman.
Dr. King was not completely committed to nonviolence. When I say not committed, he saw it first as a tactic until he was fully converted to it as a lifestyle. And my father helped me with that, to understand that early on, people saw things as a tactic. This is the best way. Dr. King then moves to, this is a lifestyle. And that is a direct connection to Thurman's conversion. And here is a nonviolent revolutionary.
One of the foundational works for the movement is a book by Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited.
I've been told that Dr. King carried Jesus and the Disinherited with him most of the time when he traveled.
It's a book that really describes what it means to be involved in such a struggle as a spiritual matter, as a matter of faith, and not just the effort to change laws for the gaining of civil rights.
He says that the African Americans didn't have any rights, just like Jesus, but they could choose to ground themselves in their own inherent dignity and worth. And if one were to choose this, it would have a lot to do with how they would deal with the question of what do you do when your back is against the wall.
All right. All right. So, before we go into the text, what do you guys think about that video? What do you think that says about faith? Or about, what can we learn from just that little segment of Howard Thurman's life? How many of you guys?
That would need each other?
It's a huge piece of this puzzle. Everything is interconnected. Everything is comes to an intersection. Have you guys heard the term intersectionality? It means all of these things kind of come together and weave each other. And that's what Thurman lived into. He was one of the first to truly, I love how Otis Moss III says it in there, that Dr. King used it as a tactic, nonviolent resistance, until he lived into it as a lifestyle, right? And that's what Thurman wrestled with and wanted us to all wrestle with. So as you listen to this text, we're going to use the text from the wedding in Cana, and I hope you'll see this deep connection. So on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is it to you, to me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." So Do whatever he tells you, is how Mary leaves this text. So tonight, I picked 4 things that I feel like are central pieces of how do we follow Jesus in the way that he says to follow. The first one is love your enemies. Loving your enemies is this radical concept. In Matthew 5, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. It's otherworldly today to even consider behaving in such a way that blesses not just those who do good to you, but even those who are out to malign or hurt you. Jesus changed the way things happened when he called Jews to love tax collectors, Gentiles, sinners, and even the Roman government. So loving your enemies and how important it is. To me, that's exactly where Howard Thurman leads the civil rights movement in that direction. Because you guys know about the March on Selma, right? You guys have all heard about the March to Selma. You've heard about the Bull Connor setting the dogs on the marchers. You've heard all of that, right? Have you heard the story about Dr. King's house getting blown up? He was in a meeting one day with the SLCC, and his house was bombed, and everybody was okay. And the news or the reporters, the story is they wanted him to lash out at the people who bombed his house. They were hoping for that to happen. And Dr. King said to them, I'm just glad everybody's up and healthy. And I don't judge, except to say I'm sad that he's filled with so much hate. So loving your enemies is an extremely difficult thing to do. In our culture, does it bode well, you guys, for loving your enemies? Is that the way our culture does things? What are some examples of ways that we do not live into that? Did you have something, Elijah?
Say like bullying or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a horrible bullying problem, don't we? That's a great one. You guys know what's going on in Israel and Gaza, right? Did you know the United States vetoed 3 times a ceasefire? So that's not really loving your enemies, right? And that's the challenge. If you're going to follow this man we call Jesus, we have to follow. And we have to see that until we see that we're all interconnected, it's hard to follow him in this way, because when you can have an enemy that you feel is disconnected, it's much easier to harm them. It's much easier to push them off as being less than. It's much easier to try to dominate over. But this Christianity thing is tough. And that's what, when they said Howard Thurman criticized Christianity, do you know, back in the day, that churches would adjust their time of worship if there was going to be a lynching? They would adjust it so people could go watch the lynching. It's not very Christian, is it? These are the things that we have to understand and learn from and grow from. And that's the hard part. Does that mean all of Christianity is bad? That's not at all. We have to be willing to look internally and look inside and see how we can be better followers of Christ. And the first one for me is love your enemies. The second one is Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. You guys know the text that talks about God being the potter and you being the clay. Have you guys ever heard that text? That is saying, let God do it rather than me. But sadly, too often we define God rather than letting God define us. And that's what this is talking about. And it's challenging, right? Because before Jesus came along, the Judeans and the people of that time were very big into the doctrines and the creeds and the legality of faith, right? You do this, you do this, you do this, right? But when Jesus came along, he challenged them and he called on the people to ask the question, why? And how does it benefit me? When Jesus challenged the dietary laws, the Pharisees and the Sadducees got all upset and up in arms. But Jesus said, hey, it's not what goes in, it's what comes out that finds you. God gives us laws for our welfare and so that we may draw closer to God. And it is our privilege and responsibility to understand how that law fits into that. So when we understand that Jesus calls the Sabbath for us, not us for them, for God, it's really important for us to get to that concept. You guys know what Sabbath is, right? You guys,
I actually don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. Sabbath is a day of rest, or it's the time when you'll rest. Sunday is a Sabbath for us, for Christians. Other religions have different other types of Sabbath. Great question, Brandon. Thank you for bringing that up. But that's the kind of thing that we have to do. And also, okay, think about this. In this town, there's one company that kind of obeys the Sabbath. You know what it is? What grocery store's closed on Sunday? Fairway. Do you know why they're closed on Sunday? Because they want their employees to be able to worship. At least that's what I tell myself. So but that's it, right? We are in a society that says, let me ask you this, guys. Resting and taking a day off, is that something that our culture looks up to? Or are we a culture that wants to be as busy as possible?
Busy as possible.
Busy as possible, right? When you ask somebody to take a break and rest, they almost look at it as negative, right? But the reality is, if we don't ever stop and rest, if we don't ever take that time, when can we get closer to God? If you don't find stillness, right? Stillness is important. Howard Thurman taught, you guys heard that little section at the beginning of the video where they talked about, Howard Thurman talked about silence, talked about contemplation before contemplation was even a thing in the States. And he also talked about taking your time. One of my favorite stories of Howard Thurman is he was asked to come and speak to a room full of clergy. And he walks into the room and goes right to the window and doesn't say a word. For like 5 minutes, he said. And then he turns around to the clergy and he says, let's get to work. And everybody was freaking out when he came in. He didn't say a word. He just went right to the window, and what he was doing was centering himself. But people don't get it and they don't understand it, right? But take time to truly enjoy and share in the Sabbath, because you all deserve it. Conviction, not condemnation. This is all good stuff. Conviction, not condemnation. In our society, we like to condemn things, right? We like to judge things. We like to make fun of people. I mean, look at our political leaders right now. I haven't heard any policy arguments from our political leaders. They're condemnation discussions. But conviction is what Jesus wants. When the woman committed adultery and she came down in front of him, they brought her, she didn't come down voluntarily, she was brought in front of Jesus. And Jesus turned, got in, sat down, and scholars have argued endless arguments over what he did when he was bent down. But he drew a line in the sand and said, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Some theologians argue that he probably wrote in the line and then he said, where's the man? One theologian, I like that response, because the woman was being charged, but it takes two to tango, essentially. But what he did say to the woman was, he didn't say, you're off the hook, nothing matters, right? He said, go and don't do this again. Don't do this again. Have conviction for what is right and what is solid and what we're called to do. So these are all important pieces of the puzzle Hosea 6 says this, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Meaning we can't just do our things to get closer to God. We have to stop. We have to take time. We have to reflect. We have to understand that we have to be truly convicted by our faith. And last, forgive always. How many here are great at forgiveness? I don't think anybody is. Peter thought he was tough stuff, right? When he said, "I'll forgive 7 times." And Jesus said, "Yeah, forgive 77. And in Hebrew, or in the Gospels, the number 7 is a symbolic number. And 77 would essentially be an infinite number of times that you forgive. Forgiveness is not weakness, as some people have you think in the world today. Forgiveness is strength. How many of you guys here have gone into some situation and not forgiven somebody and it ended up just eating at you? Anybody ever experienced that? You know why it eats at you? And this is the sad part. You know that person you haven't forgiven? 9 times out of 10, they don't care. And yet it's hurting you because you're holding on to this grudge. You're holding on to this chip on your shoulder. We have to get to the point where we let go. We let go and we trust in God. Forgiveness does not mean forget. You guys have all heard that, right? Forgive and forget. That's not at all what it is. Forgiveness is letting go. But it's hard. It's a tough thing. But this following Jesus stuff is tough if we truly want to do it. And it's not supposed to be easy. Anything you do in life is not easy. If it is easy, and more times than not, isn't worth it. Elijah, day 1, could you do anything you wanted on the football field when you started? What'd you do?
Sat there on the bench.
And you practiced, right?
Yeah.
Did you play the violin without any lessons?
No.
Ryan, could you act like you do without any practices? Kelsey, you were coming out of the womb kicking a soccer ball, right? Alejandro, you probably could do everything, right? But you have to practice. You kid. And Brandon, I'm just getting to know you well enough, so I don't have a thing, but
Practice makes perfect.
practice makes perfect, right? We all have to practice, you know. I've been in ministry for 20 plus years, right? And what I know is that I always have to be practicing to get better at it. And that's what our faith journey is. Guys, faith is not a perfection thing. Too often we make it into a faithful person has all the answers. What do you need faith for if you have all the answers? You don't. So the challenge for us is always going to be to live into the journey. To get back to the basics and the fundamentals of who we are to the core, and that is people who want to follow Jesus. So work on those things as we go out and go forth. Think about Howard Thurman. Look him up, you guys. You know, I love him. Take time. Read Jesus and the Disinherited sometime. It's a fantastic read. And you also start to see God in all of these places. And you start to understand that we connect and we are all connected. You also understand that we have to stand for things. When people use Jesus as an example to exclude somebody or to hate somebody, it's our faith that could lead us to stand up to that. And that's the push. Faith matters. How we live our journeys matters. So just try to remember to always follow when you say you follow. All right. So as close tonight, be awed by God. Allow yourself to know the beauty of living faithful lives. Celebrate that, because it's a true gift. And as always, guys, go forth in peace and in faith, and live as the blessings you truly are.